Chapter 33. Zilf didn't think he'd be coming back to the room, so he sabotaged the hatch to keep anyone from damaging the comms. Someone had shut it down before, and he wanted to make sure they couldn't do it again. At least not easily. He'd also performed another lockout on the computer systems, only this time he had locked out all other users except for himself. Not even a sysop could crack in now, unless they had an EET suit, that was. After clearing the corridor again, especially the vents, Zilf made his way to the next hatch, Module Engineering. What he couldn't have noticed until he was at the hatch were the deep scratch marks marring the steel, as well as a spray of blood near the manual release. The hatch wasn't even closed all the way, and a quick look down told him why. Someone had tried to pull it shut, but it had gotten stuck on what might have once been a human foot. Now it was little more than shattered bone, providing just enough of an obstacle to keep the hatch from shutting all the way. Whomever had done it, they either hadn't realized the hatch was still open, or were in too much of a hurry to care. The latter scenario made it likely some threat had been inside and might still be in there. Zilf pulled the spare wrench from his arm and put it in his tool hand. Dual-wielding the metal tools like swords, he pushed the bottom of the hatch with his foot and stepped back, still mindful of the vent behind him. The hatch swung open, the encrusted bone crackling and scraping against the steel deck. Zilf winced at the noise before his eyes saw the complete destruction beyond. The room, large enough for 3 EET cylinders as well as racks of tools, had been looted as if by a punk band's rowdy fans. One cylinder had been smashed with what looked like a wrench, its control and circuitry sprouting from one side in a rat's nest of gossamer thin wire. The other two had severe scarring on the housing, but looked somewhat intact. The tool racks lay on their sides on the deck, the contents of supply boxes scattered across the floor. The nourishment station had been broken into, contents removed, and several green and red streaks marked the deck. 2 open vents. Of course, Zilf muttered. He kicked away what was left of the human remains and shut the hatch behind him with little resistance. Stepping carefully around the vents, he cleared the space, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The room appeared devoid of life. A wrench, covered in green slime, had been bent like a piece of high-grade plastic, the steel stressed in its middle, and lay on the floor in disgrace. "The fuck did that?" Zilf asked aloud. "You know it did that, and EET did that." Augmented servos helped EETs perform superhuman acts of strength on a daily basis, and while Zilf could probably snap a wrench in half if he tried hard enough, he couldn't understand why someone would choose to bend one. What was it Yuri had said about the wrecking bars in Station 2? They bent if pressure was applied long enough instead of using a quick jerk. Maybe the wrench had bent while someone had tried to pry something open. But what? He eyed the remaining cylinders. Both were closed as if occupied in printing, but that was impossible. He'd hear the sounds of the printer heads, see a holo display with statuses, as well as the loadout. Had they maybe been deactivated while printing? No, that was impossible too. Unless you somehow sabotaged the safety systems, the cylinders remained open at all times while not in use to protect against unwary humans trapping themselves inside. Zilf walked to the damaged cylinder and inspected it. Unlike its brethren, its door was indeed open. More scratch marks, more signs of damage from a wrench or an EET fist. Maybe both. No one would be using this printer again. Even with all of his tools and necessary supplies, it would take Zilf more than a week to repair this mess, if it was repairable at all. Why? Why do this? He moved to the second, placed a glove against the smooth metal housing, and activated his sonic sensors. After listening for a brief moment, he took a step back. The cylinder wasn't empty, and whatever was inside breathed in liquid gasps. After slowing his heart from the shock, he placed his glove back to the metal and activated the eruptor. EET, he said, the sound waves carrying through the metal and into the atmosphere inside the cylinder. Who are you? The only response was a smash against the cylinder from within. Zilf stepped back again, both weapons raised. A dimple appeared in the metal surface. The other cylinder began to shake. He stared in disbelief from one to the other. No voices, just the sound of someone trying to breathe through flooded lungs. He knew that sound. He just didn't want to believe the creatures had gotten inside. Someone trapped them in there, he guessed. Managed to trick the creatures inside, set the cylinders to print, and sabotage the printers before they could complete whatever they were doing. 2 more dimples appeared in the second cylinder, while 4 massive ones appeared in the third. Zilf wasn't dumb enough to stick around and find out what was inside them. Instead, he scurried through the room, desperately trying to find another tool, something he could use. Nothing. No tools. However, there were cabinets at the far end. He ran to them as fast as he dared while the cylinders continued to pucker outward, their steel doors beginning to give. He flung open the cabinets one by one, bypassing spare components, suit feeder blocks, and delicate engineering tools. The last cabinet, however, had what he was looking for: plasma packs. Zilf pulled the spent pack from its slot, ejected the empty from his arm, and popped the fresh one in. His HUD immediately announced he had 100% plasma fuel. 2 more packs, one of them damaged, remained on the shelf. He quickly deposited both in his pouch. The scream of rending and tearing metal filled the room, and he whirled back to the cylinders. The third cylinder's door burst outward in a spray of distressed metal and electronic components, the rain of debris pattering loudly on the metal deck as a suited arm hove into view. Zilf slammed the wrench in his tool hand back against his arm and brought up the plasma torch, the reassuring blue teardrop easily visible. He set the torch to a narrow focused beam and froze as the cylinder's occupant stepped out. Whatever was inside the suit was definitely not human. The helmet hung at an odd angle and the arms were off kilter. All 4 of them. It stood facing him, a clicking sound coming from its external speakers. The thing stumbled toward him, arms outstretched, its boots slamming into the deck with each step. Zilf's mind unfroze, and he activated the torch. He had plenty of fuel now, and he'd upped the power to 3/4. The narrow beam shot out of the plasma torch and sliced a clumsy diagonal through the helmet, the mirrored visor instantly melting and dripping down the suit. Through the damaged visor, a horror show of a face stared at him from 2 eye clusters, one blasted by the beam, and the other filled with those dead doll eyes. The thing shrieked at him, its stumbling increasing. It was trying to bull rush him, and Zilf danced away from the thing as it leaped. The room shook, and the heavy suit crashed into the deck before sliding 1/2 meter into the metal cabinets. The crunch of bending metal filled the room. Zilf lined up the torch and blasted the back of the creature's helmet from 2 meters away. The beam sliced through the metal and superheated steam exploded from inside. He could practically smell roasted flesh and burning offal. The suited thing twitched and rolled, its keening noises louder than ever and further distorted by the external speakers. Zilf ran forward, raised his wrench high, and brought it down on the damaged helmet with as much force as he could. The helmet exploded from the impact, ropes of green and red liquid geysering into a spray of droplets. Just for good measure, he stomped on the helmet until it was little more than a flat conglomeration of alien flesh and metal. Zilf made an oof sound and stumbled forward into the already crushed and damaged lockers. While finishing off the first creature, he hadn't checked on the second cylinder. The thing that had stepped out of it had pushed him forward. He rolled to his side, the plasma torch bared before him. The suit had no helmet. The triangular head sticking out of the malformed, half-printed collar clicked its gray mandibles together. Like most of the other creatures, the thing appeared to see with eye clusters. Unlike them, however, these eye clusters covered every square centimeter of the creature's upper face, the lower portion a circular maw with a ring of sharp, shark-like teeth. The thing didn't stumble, didn't move awkwardly. It seemed far too comfortable in the suit, too human. The proportions reminded him of the creature that had been in the 4th specimen container, the one that looked the most human and the most disturbing. The thing was within a meter of him when he activated the plasma torch. The beam hit the top of the creature's skull and lanced through it easily. Howling, the thing stepped away in a crouch, its head pulsed, and a projectile slammed into Zilf's helmet. Integrity alarms filled his HUD and the interface flickered with blue static for a moment, before clearing and showing him another blurred shape coming at him. He didn't have time to move his head as a second projectile hit his chin. Even through the heavy armor, the impact rocked his brain and his skull, making him see stars. Despite his clouded vision and the suit's damaged forward cam, he rolled to the side as another projectile flew over his shoulder and hit the cabinets with a wet crunch. The peripheral vision on Zilf's left side was all but gone, the image pixelated in places and completely black in others. The right side still showed him a perfect view of the thing that had stood to its full height and appeared ready to leap at him. Zilf changed the focus on the tool and fired. A blue ball of plasma launched from the tool and hit the suited creature in the shoulder. The suit metal melted into slag, and gouts of steam rose from the damaged area. The creature screamed and leaped at him, Zilf firing another round as the EET suit came within 1/2 meter. He closed his eyes and braced for the impact, but when it came, it was like nothing he'd ever felt. Not even the collapsing building on Handley 5 had hit this hard. Zilf's entire body vibrated with the collision, pain screaming from his stressed spine to his extremities and back again. The thing was on top of him, and although he couldn't see more than a close-up of the thing's mouth, he knew it was pummeling the sides of his suit. His suit's alarms made their own inhuman shriek inside his helmet. He'd lost 40% integrity on his left hip. His chest was down to 30% and his right to 10%. His helmet, on the other hand, stood at 5%. Zilf shook away the shock, raised his tool arm, and bent it at the elbow. Narrow beam, high power, he told himself, his mind desperately trying to focus despite his blurred vision and the pounding in his skull. The beam came to life, but it was impossible for him to see if and where it hit. Didn't matter. The massive suit rolled away from him. Panting and trying to catch his breath, Zilf forced himself to one knee and swung his tool arm to try and follow the suited thing. Its left arm hung useless, the metal having reformed into a clump that had frozen the shoulder joint. Zilf aimed through bleary eyes and fired again, this time at the creature's right leg. The beam punctured the metal and met flesh. Greenish steam poured through the hole, and the creature dropped to one knee, spat an errant projectile at him, and roared at the ceiling. Zilf aimed at the other arm and slagged the shoulder before getting to his shaky feet. He stumbled forward within a meter of the creature, set the plasma tool to full, and blasted the thing in the face. The head exploded in a burst of gore that splattered against his helmet and armor. The headless suit twitched and rolled for a moment before coming to a halt. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Zilf's breathing and dripping liquid. After swaying on his feet for a moment, he walked backward to the bulkhead and leaned against it. The suit flooded his bloodstream with a cocktail of painkillers and anti-inflammatories, and the electric stabs of pain pulsing through every part of his body slowly faded to dull aches. The pounding in his skull followed, although his vision remained blurred. He took a deep breath and shook his head hard. Both his neck and spine screamed in protest, but his vision cleared at once. The two suited creatures remained motionless, and the room still. "Can't stop swimming when you're over the coral beds," his father had told him. "You try and tread water and you'll cut your feet. The ocean doesn't care how smart you are, Zulfikir, that you can walk on two legs or exist in two separate biomes. The ocean is emotionless, uncaring, and swallows the unwary. Always respect the ocean." "Can't stop swimming," Zilf muttered. It took some effort, but he managed to push off the bulkhead and slowly, awkwardly, make his way to the center of the room. He glanced upward at the open vent, certain something would drop through at any moment and savage what was left of his suit. Nothing did. He checked his suit status and mentally cried out. The suit was fucked up beyond all recognition, or FUBAR. He had lost a significant amount of mobility in his tool arm, and several servos in his left leg had either frozen or broken. He'd walk with a limp, unable to completely flex the leg. To make matters worse, he couldn't lift his head completely. One of the neck joints had frozen too. Turning, he looked longingly at the broken suit cylinders. Comical, really. He'd come to the one place he could rearm and had been attacked. Instead of being able to repair or print a new suit, he could no longer move properly, and his body felt as though it had been hit with a building. "Fuck you," he said to the broken cylinders. Just as he was making his way to the hatch, he saw a camera in the upper corner, the indicator glowing red. "You watching me, Harvey?" he yelled through the external speakers. There was no reply. Zilf stepped to the hatch, opened it, and after clearing corners, walked into the corridor. He slammed the hatch shut behind him. Chapter 34. The long corridor ended in a lift. Zilf, dragging his left leg with each step forward, made his way slowly through the empty hall, his eyes alert for movement, ears listening for sound. The latter was difficult because a high-pitched ringing just wouldn't leave him. Impact tinnitus? Or had the creature's shrieks and growls through the external speakers overtaxed his auditory nerves? Didn't matter that much. He might not be able to hear the whine of distant servos, but he'd hear something drop behind him or moving on his flank. That would have to be enough until he decompressed the station. When he reached the end of the corridor, he scanned the lift cage. Luckily, it wasn't the same lift he'd sent down before. He must have skirted that entire section of the module. Instead, the metal gleamed except for the portions slathered in green goo. He quickly checked the lift's ceiling, found it intact, and hissed a sigh of relief. At least something was going right. An ironic grin on his face, he stepped inside the cage, broke the lockout, and touched the button for level 10. The lift started with a slight jerk and began its descent. Zulf checked his plasma torch, found he had less than 50% fuel, and blushed. Had he really used that much fuel on those two suits? Now that he thought about it, he'd set the torch to high power and blasted the last one in the face with a ball of plasma rather than sticking with just a beam. He unslotted the fuel pack, placed it in his pouch, and slammed the fresh one home. Unlike the bandoliers for the bolt guns, plasma packs were reusable. He still had energy reserves. Maybe there was some hope. While the lift continued its descent, Zulf stood in the far corner, plasma torch ready, and pointed at the ceiling. He wasn't going to be caught by surprise again. He kept expecting a boom from above him and claws or teeth to cut through the relatively thin ceiling, but needn't have worried. As the lift slowed, finally making its way to level 10, he noticed the shaft had a significant amount of damage. The plasteel cowlings all but shattered, and the steel beneath severely dented. Spatters of green goo and blood seemed scattered haphazardly down the shaft. Each splatter had a missing piece of cowling in its center. Plasma rifle? He wondered aloud. Plasma rifle. Someone had been blasting at something from inside the lift, and by the looks of it, they'd had to change targets, perhaps even ammo, multiple times. Was that you, Griggs? The lift finally slowed, the green goo and blood spatter diminishing and finally disappearing altogether. Whomever had been fighting either died before reaching the bottom or managed to survive. Either way, Zulf had to expect a little company. As the lift landed, Zulf repositioned both the wrench and the plasma torch to face the cage. The vision on the left side of his forecamera had further deteriorated and gone mostly dark. Through the cage, Zulf saw another corridor beyond, this one less than 5 by 3 meters in size. While the room was small enough to easily defend, every surface had the growth, although not as thick as it had been in the cylindrical room. Thankfully. Zulf scanned the ceiling for vents, found 2, and inwardly groaned. More goo, more alien shit. How many more creatures would he have to fight? The better question was how many could he fight before they overwhelmed him or his suit gave up the ghost. Another good strike to his helmet, and it was done. Then he'd either get a proboscis to his unprotected face or whip cleaving his skull in half. The rest of the suit? The left leg had more damage than just the servos from too many hits to the thigh and calf, and his left hip ached like a rotten tooth. In short, his left side was trashed. Good thing I'm right-handed, he said with a weary smile. Zulf opened the cage slowly and as silently as he could. Wincing at a barely audible squeal from the metal fittings, he stepped out of the lift, his limp keeping him to a slow pace. No GTFO, no FEAR, he told himself. Whatever came next, whatever creatures jumped him, he could only fight or die. It was that simple. He continued down the short corridor to the large hatch ahead. A radiation symbol blazed on one side, while a red biohazard symbol glowed on the other. A warning notice proclaimed, "Suited personnel only." Radiation and biohazard. The station reactors were most likely beyond that hatch. The biohazard sign? Something quote-unquote experimental, most likely in the room beyond. Only question was whether the something was alive. He stared at the camera above the hatch, its red light steady and seeming to look back at him. An alert popped up on his HUD. Harvey was in comms range. The team channel came to life.
Zulf, just leave,
Harvey said in his high-pitched voice.
Take the lift. Get out of here.
Where's Griggs? Harvey paused for a beat.
Around. His suit was catastrophically damaged. He told me to keep going.
Zulf narrowed his eyes and tightened his fingers on the wrench. So who used a plasma rifle in the lift back there?
Your squad mate gave me his rifle. Only thing that kept me alive on my way down.
Rather than continue staring at the camera, Zulf walked to the hatch control panel. As expected, it had been locked out. No matter. He could cut through the fucking thing if he needed to. I have orders, Zulf said, to escort you to the orbital and to destroy the facility.
No,
Harvey said.
No. You can leave. I'll stay here.
Zulf connected to the hatch interface and ran through his hacks in quick succession. None of them affected the lockout. However, he did find a back door into the atmosphere system inside the room. Sloppy, he thought. You've been watching me since I entered Station 3, haven't you? Zulf asked. Harvey said nothing. Did you also see what happened to Station 2? How my best friend died? Harvey didn't respond. Zilf set the plasma torch to a narrow focused beam, 50% power, and held it up to Harvey. Answer me, Harvey, or I'm coming in. If I do, I might just forget I'm supposed to extract you. Such a threat should have made the pencil-necked physician panic, but Harvey sounded cool and calm.
I wouldn't come in here if I were you. You might not like what you find.
Worse than what I've already seen? Open the fucking hatch, Harvey. Harvey chuckled.
You and Yuri weren't supposed to get past Station 2. You were both supposed to die.
Hence the booby traps? Zilf asked. Did you sabotage the reactor in Station 2? Who are you?
I'm Station 3's chief scientist.
Harvey said.
You haven't figured that out? SysOp access to everything, even Stations 1 and 2.
Zilf ground his teeth. How many people had this man killed, either by infection or by letting the creatures eat them? He brought the torch to life and began a vertical cut at the hatch seam. Why? Why did you do this? Harvey's voice held a shrug.
The accident was real, Zilf, and I did call for help from Station 1's EET and medical personnel. It's one of the reasons there are so many exos in here. And we're in Station 2.
You pretended to be a physician? Zilf said, the cut now half a meter long. Why didn't the others rat you out?
Confidentiality, Zilf. Shinshou's paranoia is so easily abused.
I figured, Zilf said as he burned a full meter through the hatch. Speaking of confidentiality, someone broke it. Shinshou knows what you've done. He'd expected Harvey to sound shocked, but he wasn't.
That much is obvious, Zilf. I knew that before you even entered Station 3.
How? Zilf asked. How would you know that?
Oh,
he said.
No one told you?
A video file appeared on his HUD. Just to be safe, Zilf instructed the suit software to scan for viruses and worms. After the file had been cleared, Zilf opened it. The video opened with a shot of the triage with Reki and Li Xiao standing outside of it. No comms, Zilf said, confused, the torch and his work momentarily forgotten. So how do you have this?
Chief Scientist, remember? Each station has a private transmitter and receiver, especially since Station 2 was hardly the most important facility on Zhao 2.
Harvey paused for a moment.
Go ahead, Zilf. Watch it. Then you'll understand.
Suddenly, Zilf didn't want to watch, didn't want to hear, didn't want to know. Whatever the file contained, Harvey seemed to think it was his ace in the hole. Rather than starting the playback, he went back to cutting the hatch.
Aren't you going to watch it?
Harvey asked, his voice a little less sure now. When we're on the orbital, Zilf said. He finished the vertical cut and began a horizontal cut along the top of the hatch. We can have a long chat on the way up to level 1, an even longer one once we hop in the lift. Harvey sighed.
I told you, Zilf, I'm not coming back with you.
Why not? Don't you want to get off of here?
Why? It's such an interesting biome now, or was, before you began destroying it all.
Zilf harumphed. Make no mistake, Harvey. I'm setting the reactor to meltdown and frying every sacrilege in this place. Harvey sounded amused.
Sacrilege? You religious, Zilf?
Not especially, Zilf said, but what you've done is a perversion. The doctor, scientist, whatever the fuck he really was, laughed.
Oh, Zilf, you've got this so wrong. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this.
Not like this, Zilf echoed. So how was it supposed to go, Harvey? You play with the monsters until you understand them, and then send one up the orbital for Shinshou to use as a bioweapon?
Nothing so tawdry. Shinshou barely even knows what's down here. All they know is that we found a unique power source on Zhao 2. Station 3 was built to study it.
Power source? Zilf paused, cutting. What power source?
Doesn't matter. We were wrong. We were all so wrong.
Harvey said.
The entire ocean is a power source. Deuterium, minerals, and something quite unexpected.
What was unexpected? Zilf asked as he continued the cut.
Doesn't matter, Zilf. You wouldn't understand. However, if you keep cutting, you'll understand all too well.
That a threat? Zilf asked. Pressure blew out from the cracks in the hatch, his suit alerting him to high concentrations of methane, CO2, and near hazardous radiation levels.
No,
Harvey said, sounding bored.
If you're smart, you'll stop being an engineer, be a human, and get the fuck out of here before something eats you.
Zilf couldn't help a sour laugh escaping his lips. Chances of something eating me as I make my way up are pretty high, Harvey, You know how damaged my suit is,
I do indeed.
Harvey said.
I knew you'd find the EET station, knew you'd try and rearm. It's what anyone would do.
Zilf furrowed his brow. Harvey had set up the cylinders and programmed them. He shouldn't have had access to those, even with sysop access. The cylinders were biometrically locked to EET personnel only. He suddenly had a bad feeling that there was something he wasn't seeing. Think, turtle. Shinsho knows what you've done, Zilf said. There's no place in the galaxy you'll be safe.
Can't find me if they think I'm dead.
Harvey had his own way off planet. That much was clear. The only question was where his escape vehicle might actually be. Zilf was willing to bet it was somewhere on this level, or the secret level 11. When I destroy the facility and you're still here, it'll be more than wishful thinking. Zilf finished the horizontal cut and bent to start another. He paused a moment before saying, "Fuck it," rearing back his good leg and smashing it into the hatch. The metal buckled easier than he thought it would, and the hatch tore partway open. He kicked again, and the hatch folded backward into the room beyond. "I'm coming in," Zilf said. "Want to talk face to face?"
Considering the atmosphere in here, I don't think that's a good idea. Besides, I feel a little safer talking to you this way.
"Well," Zilf said, giving the hatch one last savage kick, the hatch's hinges shattering and rattling on the deck like hail. "Let's see if I can fix that."